So, oh, I think we can get started. Are you ready to get started, Juanita?
I am.
Okay, great. Well, I am Andrea Papajohn with the City of Millbrae. I'm going to share my screen and just talk a little bit about the program, and then we'll get started. So, here we go. Okay, can you see this? Okay. Oh, you can even see them. Yeah, never mind. You can see my notes and everything. Great. Well, welcome to the lawn conversion class tonight. This is sponsored by the City of Millbrae. I work for the City of Millbrae. I'm in the environmental programs and the Bay Area Water Supply Conservation Agency, also known as BOSCA. So I'm just going to go through just a couple quick slides. As you probably all know, to ask questions, you can raise your hand, or you can put something in the Q&A and we'll read the questions. I can read the questions for our instructor. We can make it casual. And so if you want to raise your hand, a question comes up, we can stop and answer that right away. Oh, yeah, there's your raise your hand and there's Q&A. Okay, so if you're not familiar with BOSCA, BOSCA represents 26 agencies, including the City of Millbrae, and they purchase our water from the San Francisco Regional Water System. I won't go through all the details here, but BOSCA and the City of Millbrae have a very similar goal of wanting to provide high quality supply of water at a fair price. So we're grateful that they helped negotiate that with the SFPUC for us and 25 other agencies. Okay, so as you probably know, we are in a drought and we're trying to conserve water. So we're hosting webinars and the city has rebates. But the biggest use of water is typically outdoor water use. So I'm really glad you're here tonight because you can learn how to reduce, water use in your garden. And I'm just going to talk really briefly. There's some rebate programs that we offer through BOSCA. And I say we, the City of Millbrae. We have Lawn Be Gone. If you want to convert your lawn to drought tolerant lawn, you can get paid $1 per square foot. We have rain barrels that capture rain from your roof, and then you can reuse it outdoors. And there's also a smart controller rebate that uses weather to adjust. So if it happens to be raining, it won't irrigate. And those are discounted, I think, at $99 plus tax. And then there's also option for a rain garden rebate. All this is, you can get all this information at bayareaconservation.org, or you can also email me, and I'll give you my email in just a second. And also this class is recorded, and BOSCA has some other classes that are recorded too. For example, there's water efficient edible gardening, rainwater harvesting, barrels and gardens, succulents, native drought tolerant plants, and others here on the screen that you can see. And so if you go to bosca.org /conserve/landscaping /videos, you can actually go and see these recordings. So that's pretty cool. If you'd like any more information from me on our rebates, or you're just not sure where to find the videos, or anything else I can help you with, this is my contact information, Andrea Papajohn, and there's my number and my email. So please reach out if there's anything I can do. Okay, so now I would like to introduce our instructor, Juanita Salisbury, and she is going to lead us through the class. So thank you all for coming, and I will hand it over to her.
Thanks, Andrea.
I guess I need to stop sharing. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right, I'll share my screen.
Okay.
All right. There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight we're going to be talking about lawn conversion. And I am a California licensed landscape architect, and I also have a doctorate degree in biopsychology. And so I use these two educational backgrounds to guide what I do in terms of habitat design and landscape design. I do have a social media presence. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, and also on my YouTube channel, Primrose Way. And I designed and installed and maintain 5 pollinator gardens here in Palo Alto. If you want to come to Palo Alto and see what these native plants look like in a garden, we have 5 very different gardens to take a look at. Here in Palo Alto, this is Embarcadero Road. We've got 2 gardens, the Primrose Way Pollinator Garden, Gwynda Street Pollinator Garden, Hopkins Avenue Pollinator Garden, Arcadia Place, and then Island Drive. And these gardens are always open to the public. Most of the plants are labeled. I usually go out about once a week to check in on things, to see how everything is looking, pick up trash, that kind of thing, do a little weeding. So if you see me, I try to get out on Sundays to take a look, make the rounds. Happy to answer questions anytime. So tonight, the broad overview of my talk, I'm all about form following function. And that's a design thing. Function is so important when making decisions. We always have to think about what are things, what are people, what is it doing in the environment, what is its function? And then we'll talk about getting rid of your lawn. We'll talk about some lawn alternatives. We'll talk about trees and native plants, and then maintenance. And I'm going to be going over these topics in a broad overview of concepts so that you will be able to take these big concepts and apply them to your very specific situations. I will have specific plant recommendations, but I want you to have a big sort of picture perspective on how all these components fit in to really optimize every drop of water in your garden. I have 47 slides, so bear with me. I won't spend a ton of time on each slide, but we do have a lot to go through. But first of all, let's talk about function here. Form follows function. This is such a great guide in terms of design decisions, making choices about what we want to do. Consider how you're going to use an area outside. Consider how the humans are using it, where you're walking, where you're sitting, where you're playing, dining, lounging, those sorts of things. Do you need a lawn for those activities? And really, if you do have a lawn, how often are you really going to use it? So basically, we're talking about how we can take our functions and use those in terms of function-based decision-making for optimizing water use outside. So as Andrea mentioned, most of the outdoor irrigation accounts for most of the home's water use. Lawns can use up to 50% of outdoor water use. So consider the function of a lawn when you're deciding whether or not to have one. They're pretty, right? They look nice. They're nice and uniform. They're green. They're great to walk on barefoot. But what are the other ways that you can achieve a walkable surface that you can walk on barefoot, perhaps? So do you need a lawn? Also, when you have a lawn, in addition to the irrigation cost, you have mowing costs. And mowing, if you're doing intensive mowing, you end up with more weeds and pests. So maybe it's not such a good thing to have. And also note where people are congregating in this picture. This is a party, and we have one child running around on the lawn, but everybody else is over on the patio. So something to think about. Now, don't get afraid of this particular slide here. this is my proof that outdoor irrigation accounts for most of a home's water use. This first table up here is done by the Codes and Standards Research Council report, California's Residential Indoor Water Use Report, 2nd edition, 2015. And it shows for a typical home, you know, a 3-bedroom house, it's using about 46,521 gallons of water each year. And that's just the inside. Now, one of the things I do as a landscape architect is I design irrigation systems. And then in an irrigation system, you have different irrigation valves, spray heads for the lawn, bubblers for trees, and so forth. And each of those valves, I group in this table below here into zones of water use, whether the plants are high, medium, or low water use. So as you can see, there's a few of both. We've got low and then moderate. Now the moderate areas here that are most important are these two. These are the lawn. I also figured out the area that the lawn takes up. So overall outside for this particular property, and it was about 13,000 square foot residential lot, they're using over 63,000 gallons of water per year. While the inside of the home, which was a 3-bedroom home, was only using, if average, about 46,000. So more than the house is using. The lawn area is using 28,539 gallons of water a year, or 45% of the total irrigation water, but only accounts for 19% of the landscape area. It's a hog. So, you know, we got to reduce that down. That's a lot of water. So the total use for this household potentially is over 100,000 gallons of water per year. That's a lot of water. All right, so let's first talk about getting rid of our lawn. Let's say we want to just rip it out and do some native plants in there. An easy way that you can do it really quickly is by sheet mulching. Basically, it's where you take pieces of cardboard and layer them right on top of the grass. You can mow it down to make it short, leave clippings in place, and then pile compost and soil and mulch on top of that. And you have an instant garden bed. You don't have to remove your grass at all. And this is a nice resource that kind of walks you through those steps, this lawntogarden.org. And when you're sheet mulching, the great thing about this is that you're not removing the grass. You're going to be leaving it in place. It's just less work to leave the grass and just put the cardboard on top, which will then decompose as the grass decomposes. And you get compost and mulch on top of that. You're saving moisture inside the soil. You're providing organic material for that garden bed. So with 5 public gardens to take care of, I'm always looking at ways to work less, because it's a lot of work in total. But if I can reduce the amount that I'm doing, you know, I'm all for that. And sheet mulching is actually one of those easier things to do. I noticed that somebody has a raised hand.
Hey, it's me, Juanita, Andrea. I was just curious, where do you get the cardboard? If you know, let's say fairly, I mean, not that big of an area, but once you start on, you know, on sort of flattening out boxes, it seems like you need quite a few. Do you have any suggestions?
Yes. So personally, I get a lot of things delivered to the house. And so I have a lot of cardboard boxes that way. And chances are people's neighbors have cardboard boxes that, you know, will just end up in their recycling bins. So I would say reach out to your neighbors if you don't have a lot of boxes of things from deliveries. Reach out to your neighbors first and see if, you know, people are generally pretty happy to get rid of their boxes. You know, if somebody has moved recently, sometimes people's People have moving boxes left over. So those are just a couple of ways to accumulate the boxes that you need, and also might intrigue your neighbors as to what you're doing. I hope that answers your question, Andrea.
Yes, thank you. Great ideas. And yes, it would be intriguing to the neighbors. That's a great idea.
Well, you start the movement right on your block and say, I'm doing this, and maybe people will follow. All right, so then when you get rid of your lawn and you can put down this beautiful mulch, this is actually a garden that I designed just down the street from my house, and the homeowner put down this beautiful mini wood chip bark mulch. It's a little bit more expensive, but it creates this nice sort of beautiful walkable surface. It looks clean and just it's very attractive. Mulch covers up a lot of ugliness, and it gives you a nice clean slate to walk on or plant in, and you can start dreaming pretty easily. Now, some people might say, but I do want some grass. I do want to have that grass. What do you recommend? So I'm all about native plants, and there's a reason for that, which we'll get into in more detail. But one company that I like to use as a landscape architect that can provide a native sod made of native grasses is a company called Delta Bluegrass. They have sod that you can just roll it out. And these native grasses only use about 1/3 as much water as a non-native turf blend. And so a couple of different ones that I like to use, and I have a lawn in my front yard that I'm converting over to native grasses and a few other plants. I have little violets growing in there and strawberries, so it's a little bit more meadowy. But one that I like is the Agrostis palens. And I like that because it's very fine textured. It's a warm season grass, so it's green during the summertime. So that's a way to achieve that green look with a grass that requires 1/3 as much water. It spreads by runners, and I'm ripping out by hand bits of my non-native grasses, and then I'm seeding in the Agrostis palens. I'm not using sod. I'm going the cheap route by using grass seed. And I put down the grass seed in the wintertime when it rains. That way it has a chance to establish and sprout and get going. And then for the wintertime, I also have been working in this Festuca rubra, which is the Molade fescue, so-called Molade, and that's a cool season grass. So I get green in winter and in the summer with a blend of my own choosing. So I use seeds for these grasses, and I get my seeds from Larner Seeds. They have both of these. They're very inexpensive, and a little bit goes a long way. So these are two ways, two seed types that you can use to get green all year. And there are various types of native bunch grasses that we have in California. Bunch grasses mean they grow in clumps, and that's just another look that you can get. And these things don't have to be mowed. In my own front yard, which is actually small, I don't mow. I actually come in with hand pruners about once a month and just trim everything, kind of sculpt it into a natural kind of soft look. So that way I'm not getting gasoline fumes out there or creating noise or anything like that. So it's a lot less work. So we've got some bunch grasses there, and I mean, how pretty is this? This is probably the Agrostis palens, and then a non-native alternative. And I don't like to push non-natives very much, but in between stepping stones. A nice ground cover to use that uses very little water is a non-native thyme called elfin. Stays nice and flat. And this is actually in my own backyard. Now, you're going, okay, so I don't need a lawn to walk on. What other options do I have for creating that big green swath that just is green all year. I don't want to mow it. I want to use maybe 1/10 as much water as a lawn would use. What do you suggest? And so one specific ground cover here, and ground covers are a great way to go. Instead of using grass, which can be really fussy and very diva-ish, is to use a ground cover like this native Ceanothus thriciflorus. This is a variety called a Yankee Point. It's evergreen, which means it keeps its leaves all year long. It doesn't drop them all at once like deciduous plants do. It's about 15 inches tall. It spreads pretty quickly. It has beautiful fragrant blossoms in the spring. It can take sun or a little tiny bit of shade, and it's super low water use. Maybe have to water this every 4 or 5 weeks in the summertime, if that. It does not like water. It likes it nice and dry. And as you can see, it's filled in this kind of awkward area that, if it was lawn that was totally walkable, would people cut through this person's yard? Maybe. But with a ground cover like this, it kind of sends a message that no, don't walk through here. So this is just a nice alternative in terms of a green, beautiful swath of greenery. But if you still want to walk, and you've maybe looked at doing grasses and native grasses, there's another plant that you can work into the grass mix. And this is Achillea millefolium, the so-called yarrow. And this is semi-evergreen. You can mow it if you want. I just cut it with shears. Blossoms come in different colors. White is what you typically see out in the environment, but you can get it in pink and red. It comes in a few different colors for blooms, and it grows in the sun or in the shade. It's actually very, very drought tolerant. Very hard to kill this plant. A non-walkable area for a ground cover is and this is one of my favorites to use, is Fragaria vesca, our evergreen strawberry that we have. And I love this plant. It's so easy to get more of this plant. If you just bought one and then took the berries and spread them around to various places, you can get more plants. And that's how I do it in my garden. If you don't eat them first, the berries is so sweet, they taste like candy. So a great plant, and it likes to have mostly shade. Another ground cover, this is a non-walkable one, and this is actually out at the Primrose Way Garden. This is a salvia, a sage plant called Bee's Bliss. It's evergreen, has a beautiful lilac bloom in the springtime. It's fragrant, about 12 inches tall in general. In the middle, it's a little bit taller, and it grows really fast. Once it establishes, it'll be 8 feet across in 2 years. These plants have been in since 2016, and they're about 15 feet across each. So they're very happy and will continue to spread out. We actually have to trim them out of the street and off the sidewalk. So these really just want to go to town. So another alternative, a specific ground cover, but there are lots of different ground covers to choose from. So how do we choose? So, all right, so we can talk about grasses, and grasses are great, and you can certainly use those. But if you're looking to take that lawn down to a small area and then planting up the rest of the area with other plants, you might ask yourself, then what do I plant? And the only answer that's correct here is California native species of plants. And the reason for that is because they are adapted to our conditions here. They've been here for millennia. And a great place to look for plants is on the calscape.org database. This is done by the California Native Plant Society. You find information and resources here. You can find California native plants, research those plants, and from that you can create your plant palette of trees, shrubs, perennials, bulbs, vines, and succulents. And this is a screenshot of their landing page, and it talks a little bit about Calscape. You can contact them if you want to ask a question. a planting guide, which goes into a lot of specific things about planting that is written by experts. And that's my go-to place for information. Nurseries, where to find these plants. You can click on the links. Most of these have websites where you can look at their inventories to see what they have available. You can generate your own plant list here, which is an Excel spreadsheet, so you can keep track of everything. And then butterflies. What's that? But you can see that there's a lot to choose from, 7,990 plants native to California, and they've broken it down into different categories for us: all plants, trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, and so forth. So it's a cornucopia of wonderful information. But butterflies, well, let's dive right in. A better question than what to plant is who to feed. And remember, I said I had a doctorate in biopsychology. My area of research, my area of expertise was on ingestive behavior, eating and drinking, and surprisingly enough, water balance. And so this is where everything comes full circle for me. What CalScape does is it provides you with a list of those butterfly and moth species that feed on the native plants. One of the things that is key to understanding why that's important that we have these native plants is because native insects like butterflies and moth species only feed on specific plant types. They're very picky about the chemicals that they eat. And so they just don't eat everything. They are actually very picky. And so we have butterflies and moths, which is, keep those in mind, but we're also going to be looking at pollinators and how plants need pollinators to survive. And so here's a broad concept that I'm trying to get across here, is that biology can help us save water. And here's the framework for it. We know that biology is a powerful thing. We know that because we get clues from nature. There's a thing called speciation in plants. And so speciation means that we get variation of color and morphology within the same species. You can get things that are maybe a little bit pinker or a little bit whiter in the same species of plants. And that kind of thing happens because of variations in the genes that are spread around. And those genes are spread around by pollinators. And when they're spreading those genes around, we find that speciation, variation, happens much more rapidly when you have pollinators moving the genes around. Other plants are wind pollinated. They send out a lot of pollen into the wind, which scatters hither and yon and goes everywhere. But with pollinators, it's very specifically shared among plants of the same species at one time. And so the pollinators are spreading these plants then for other insects to eat. That's the key of how everything works. Pollinators are spreading the goodies then that are these plants that butterfly and moth larvae actually eat. So what this tells us in this big, broad concept about the power of biology is that these biological factors may be more important considerations than abiotic factors like climate, geology, and water for determining what to plant. So the power of biology, let's wield it. And in San Mateo County, you have 83 species of butterflies and moths. That's a lot. But you still want to squeeze out as much goodness out of one drop of water. And how can you find out how much water plants use? So there's a handy website, which is the Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. It's an online searchable database for plant factors of individual plant species. Basically what it is a ranking, and plants can be ranked based on the percent of water use of turf grass, which is 100% non-native turf grass. And that's the reference against which other water use is measured. So a plant that has very low water use, a plant factor, a percentage of 0 to 10%, that's literally 10% of what lawn uses. And so if you go to that website, let's say you have a list of plants and you really want to like group all the really low water use plants together, you can find out, and then, you know, in your design of your garden, put all those plants together that are very low water use. Don't mix high and low together. You want to keep everybody who's going to be using about the same amount of water in the same area. And this is where you find the information. So, and when you're laying things out, this is a nice little design tip here. What I like to tell people, when you're working out your planting areas, use graph paper to draw on. You can have 1 square equaling 1 foot. And if that square on the page is 1/4 inch, then it becomes 1/4 inch equals a foot. If it's 1/8 of an inch, then it's 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. And that's your scale. And so you can draw to scale. And what you want to do is add your plants once you've measured out your space. At first though, before you plant anything, remember function. You want to have a way to get through your garden. You want to have places where you can sit. You want to have places maybe for patios, okay? Think about what your functions are that are important. Draw those out. Anything that's left over where you won't be planting, anything that's left over from those areas where you're not planting are planting areas. So, you know, plant things in nice masses. It's just easier because then you have a lot of one thing in one place, which is actually visually more appealing. Plant your large trees first, then your shrubs, layer in perennials, vines, bulbs, succulents, and annuals. And I always say, do large trees first. If you wanted to add trees later, plant really small trees. And this is a cost saving thing as well. People say, well, you know, I don't want to really dig a 15-gallon size hole for a plant. Get something in a 4-inch pot. That's a great way to save money, is get something really small, or even get a seed. If you can get a seed for free, even better. All right, but you're going, well, but there are so many plants in the world. Why California native plants? California, such a great state. We are a biodiversity hotspot. There really isn't any other place like this on the planet. We have almost 8,000 species of plants, some found nowhere else on the planet, and more than any other state in the United States. Many of our species are drought tolerant. Drought is nothing new to these plants. They know it. They've experienced it for millennia. You know, we have so much biodiversity because we have so many different kinds of environments in California. And this is key in helping to determining what to plant. We have 1,600 species of native bees here in California. Across the United States, there's 4,000 species. Honeybees aren't native. We're not going to talk about them. And so we have such a huge number of plants, I think largely in part because of our very unique ecosystems that we have, and because we have 1,600 species of bees moving the genes around. And these plants are super important for pollinators. The native pollinators really prefer native plants. And these are all photographs I've taken of these wonderful creatures. And like I said, I go out about once a week. I take a lot of macro photography. I monitor the insects so I can see what's working, if the food chain is functioning correctly. And it's a beautiful thing. So that food chain, let's talk about the food chain for a second. Again, a big piece of that broad concept where we're wielding biology. Let's talk about energy. Plants, I like to say, are the beginning of everything. They're the primary producers of food and the basis of the food chain. The only way that we can get energy from the sun into the food chain is through plants. And how we get it into the food chain is by providing the appropriate plants for the appropriate insects. So you're going, why is it as important to do, like, why should I care about caterpillars? Well, think about it. What do plants have inside them besides chemicals? They have moisture. I can hear some wheels turning. Yes, moisture is inside plants. It's in these living things. Other living things are going to go after that moisture and become moist themselves, like this moist, fat, juicy caterpillar that's getting fed to a baby bird, which is also moist on the inside. And so that's how you keep moisture in the environment, is by using the native plants. And it gets sent, that moisture gets sent up through the food chain, which is its best use. Okay, so as such, plants aren't really decorations then. We have to start thinking about them as food. Plants are food. And when you're planting food, what happens when you set the table? This means that your native plants in your garden will attract many native pollinators, and in turn insects, and in turn birds. Native plants are critical parts of sustaining life, and also critical parts of keeping moisture in the environment. Okay, because everything that's living is sharing resources. And one of these things that is shared is moisture. And so whenever I look for plants in a nursery, if I see something like this, I buy it because I know that it's going to provide me with a butterfly later on. Why is it important to see these plants as food? Because, and it's guaranteed that your native plants will attract a variety of native pollinators and other insects. It's best to avoid making your garden an ecological trap. And an ecological trap is something in the environment that attracts organisms, and because this attraction makes it easier for them to be killed through predation or other means. Okay, so we have to consider the life cycle of these creatures and make sure that they can go from eggs to larvae to adults, and then back to laying eggs and, completing their life cycles. And when you do, and you're doing it right, you get to see beautiful creatures like this in your garden. So when we're wanting to really optimize the use of every single drop of water, what we want to shoot for here, another overarching concept here, is enhancing connectivity and complexity in the landscape. And the more connectivity and complexity, the more plants will be supporting each other. Remember, I said that they share resources. Plants actually share water. This is super important if we're trying to optimize and squeeze the perfect use out of every drop. Consider how to increase connectivity and complexity in the environment. There are a couple of different ways to do that. And one of the ways is by adding lots and lots of plants. This might seem counterintuitive to people. It's like, well, I want to use less water. Don't I need less plants? It's actually, I believe, maybe it's the opposite, really, because moisture is for life. And the more that you add plants, the more that you're building a community of plants and other organisms that support each other and share water, nutrients, and information. This is how you create resiliency, buffers against disruption. The more strands in the web that you create, if you lose a few strands, you don't lose the entire thing. So imagine a machine where you're adding the right parts, in this case, plants, and a few engines, and we'll talk about what these engines are in the machine. And after a certain point, nature takes over. Well, she's pretty much in control all the time, but things start happening in terms of plants inviting other plants into their environment to live, inviting other organisms in, and your environment becomes much more resilient. And to start with, try to shoot for like 20 different native plant species. And so here's kind of like my concept of what it looks like. We have connectivity in the vertical dimension and also in the horizontal dimension. In the vertical dimension, we have trees reaching down into the groundwater with tap roots. And actually tap roots also channel water into the ground, which is kind of cool. And then underground, you have roots that are connecting up with each other. You have roots that are going underneath rocks. Rocks are great to shade the soil and to trap moisture. You have roots going under leaf piles to seek out moisture. And you have indentations in the ground, those rain gardens, which you can get a rebate for, that are also channeling moisture underground. And so you keep circulating the moisture through the environment, and trees will release moisture into the air, cooling and cleaning it. So I'm always trying to plant as many trees as possible to get it to be cool wherever I can. And so we're talking about community. Now, here's another broad concept, and this might blow your mind. But plants are social creatures. We don't, it's like, how can they be social? They don't talk, they don't but actually they do talk to each other. We just don't have the same language that they do. They talk chemically to each other. They talk through different kinds of biology with each other. And living organisms have ways of communicating that we don't know, but we get clues by looking at the communities out in the wild. So what is a plant community? And this is from the vegetation glossary on the CNPS website. A group of plant species living together and linked together by their effects on one another and the responses to the environment they share. Typically, plant species that co-occur in a plant community show a definite association or affinity with each other. They all play well together, okay? And so here in California, we have lots of different kinds of plant communities. We have coastal scrub, oak chaparral, deserts, redwood forest, and so forth. So consider the kind of plant community that you live in. Most of us here on the peninsula live in the kind of like the oak chaparral kind of coastal grassland area. And what we find in these natural areas is that the plant communities are a function of the pollinators that live in them. Remember, pollinators are going to help us get seeds from plants. And so the things that are growing are the things that the bees like to eat. So I like to think of bees as farmers whose function in the environment is to spread that genetic diversity of plants for other insects to eat. And so the bees, the pollinators, are moving that genetic material around. And so in your garden, you want to aim for the majority, like over 70% of your plant species to be local species and appropriate for your community. Here's a great picture from a hike that I took up to the northern tip of Point Reyes. Wonderful dune community here of these beautiful maritime poppies. I love these things. They have a deep taproot. The native cobweb thistle, which is a super gigantic favorite of the pollinators. Everybody goes nuts over these things because they have a bunch of nectar, sugar water in the flowers. And it is actually a larval food source for the painted lady butterfly and the Miletic crescent, I think. And then once these are done and they go to seed, finches then eat the seeds. We have lupins, and then we have some coyote bush. So, some easy plants groupings right there. So take a look at what's growing naturally, and you can get some clues from that. Again, that's my little animation there. Here we have a lady bee here. It's only the females that do this because they are the ones that provision the nest with nectar and pollen. And they're vegetarians. They only eat nectar and pollen, and they feed their babies on nectar and pollen. So they're vegetarians, and they take that pollen and that genetic diversity, and which is the male genes, and then they move it around to other plants. We get seed fertilization and seed formation. And so again, when you're thinking about, okay, so I've got all these broad ideas, how do I start? Start with trees and large plants first, then shrubs and perennials. Fit in as many trees as possible. Trees are key to getting everything to work. Then shrub layer should compose over 60% of all the plants, and you want to focus on those evergreen shrubs. I'll tell you why in a minute. And then over time, add in plants, go nuts. Add in as many grasses, perennials, bulbs, succulents, ground covers, and vines as possible. Aim for a mix of herbaceous, the ones that die back, and woody perennials, the ones that maintain their form all year long. The best time to plant is in late fall, early winter, when it's the cool rainy season, because it's cool outside, the ground is moist. It's just easier. It's a little harder to establish plants now. It can be done, but it's just easier during the planting season, which is fall and winter. And I like to use these smaller plant sizes. If I can find something in a 4-inch pot, I'm going to do that first, because that hole is going to be way easier to dig than even a 1-gallon plant or a 5-gallon plant. And a small plant is actually easy to establish. Or seeds. I'm loving seeds these days. I'm scattering seeds everywhere because seeds grow. And seeds with tap roots are not restricted by a pot. They can shoot down right into the ground right away, and they're happy. If you have tiny plants, you might want to use a physical barrier over the top of them, like chicken wire, to keep out squirrels and animals that want to dig things up right after you plant them, until they're well rooted in. Okay, so start with trees, and you want to start with those keystone trees. So what are keystone plants? Okay, another broad concept here. This will help you in terms of making choices about what plants are going to provide as many connections as possible. If you think about a stone arch, that is stones connecting in an arch pattern, the one stone in the center is the keystone that holds up the whole thing. That's what a keystone plant is. And keystone plants are those that form the backbone of habitat resources: food, shelter, nesting sites, etc. So lots of connections to other organisms. And with those connections, remember, it's going to be more resilient, and it's going to provide so many ways to keep the moisture in the environment. Keystone species help other plant species to survive. They provide, and this is how you find out which ones, the plants that feed the most butterfly and moth species. So if you go to Callscape, you can rank plants according to the number of pollinators, of butterfly and moth species, the larva, how many. So if you have a plant that feeds 58 versus 120, go with the 120. Okay, if they're pretty equal, but this is like low water use, has like the same, that's big enough for your space and all that sort of thing. If it feeds more creatures, plant that. And so by supporting large numbers of organisms, keystone species provide those critical connections in the environment. And you want to have more than one keystone species in the environment. And so start with trees. So let's take a look at keystone trees. And there are 22 tree species native to San Mateo County, and I've ranked these according to the number of butterfly and moth species. And oaks are wonderful things. Some are really big, which is not appropriate for every garden, but we also have scrub oaks, which are more shrub sized. So I always try to fit some of those in. Another keystone species is a real wonderful one to use is the prunus species, the cherry species, Prunus ilicifolia, one of my favorites, and so forth. Trees help save water. So in many ways, I mean, if you really want to feel like you're doing something good for the planet, plant a bunch of trees right now. A tree without landscape without vegetation here, pretty desolate. This is the Central Valley in the wintertime when there's no crops or anything growing, kind of depressing. And then here we have the coast live oak, Quercus agrifolia. It's really long-lived trees with hundreds of years. The acorns are edible after processing. They provide shade and a sense of space. And that's my husband there. He's 6'3" tall. So maybe not appropriate for everybody's front yard. But again, you can go with something smaller. If you have room for an oak, though, I would say plant one. trees absorb water and release it into the air, cooling and cleaning it. They form half of the rain cycle by releasing water into the atmosphere. They help circulate water across the land. Without trees, deserts can form. They improve water quality, and they reduce flooding and stabilize soil. They're just, trees are just one of the easiest things that you can do, ridiculously easy things that you can do to create a resilient environment by planting keystone species. And are they good for the climate? Oh, yes. Yes. Clouds form more often over forested areas than non-forested areas. And clouds are good because, again, moisture. And the cooling effects of those clouds and the carbon dioxide capture by trees more than offset the reflection of the sun during times when deciduous trees, the ones that drop all their leaves once a year, are bare. So, it's like, come on, people, plant some trees. It's not that hard. You can even plant a seed. And then in 20 years, some grow faster. The forests of the future are happening before you know it. One of our favorites of the oaks, I love this tree. Love, love, love the valley oak, Quercus lobata. This is at the Hopkins Avenue Pollinator Garden. This is one of those engines. The keystone species are the engines in the environment. In Santa Clara County, down here where I live, this used to be 61% of the tree cover in Santa Clara Valley. And it was huge for acorns for the Native Americans that used to live here. And so, just provided so much. Now I think that the tree cover with the oaks, these valley oaks, is about 1%. So whenever I have a spot, I plant valley oaks whenever I can. It's a keystone species. It's deciduous, which means it drops all its leaves every year, and you just leave the leaves under the tree. It's good for the tree. It's good for the soil. And those organisms that are eating those leaves drop down into the leaf litter and then hide there until they come out as adults. Okay, they spend the winter until they emerge. And valley oaks have a deep taproot that seeks out water, and then lateral surface roots that are sharing the water. So again, oaks, you can plant native plants underneath of them, and they are insect factories. So they feed just a bunch of birds, and they can live up to 600 years. They're super valuable. They can add so much value to real estate. I could go on about oaks, but they're just wonderful. If you want, though, a little bit less work, although leaving the leaves is fine underneath the tree, sometimes they go into the patios and the driveways, and we have to rake those off. Use something that is evergreen, okay, that doesn't lose all its leaves. And this way, some people say, well, native plants are going to make everything look dry. And it's like, some do, some don't. The ones that don't look dry all year long are the evergreen ones. And so there are ones that have glossy green leaves that look very tropical and lush. And that's a great way to go. So, what are some of these trees that I can fit? And so in my tiny yard, and I have a very small yard, but I've been cramming as many plants as possible in there. And some of the evergreen ones that I have that I love, love, love because they grow quickly. This one is one of my favorite ones, the mountain mahogany. It can grow in part shade. It's evergreen. It grows rapidly. It is a beautiful tree. Another one, this one is also super drought tolerant, does not really like water once it's established, is the Prunus ilicifolia, the holly leaf cherry, a powerhouse in the environment. Some of the other ones that I have in my own yard, the toyon, great evergreen plant that can grow up to 30 feet tall, and it has these great dark green leaves, red berries in the wintertime, white flowers in the spring. Arctostaphylos, or the manzanita, can, the larger ones, the tree forms, can actually get to be about 25 feet tall. Other ones that I have in my yard that are not evergreen are Acer macrophyllum. Look at those big fat leaves. I can't wait till this one is huge and it gives me all kinds of beautiful shade, a kingdom of shade underneath. I actually have a willow tree, yes, a willow, that I hand water because this is one of those keystone species. And it seems to be doing well on my haphazard hand watering. I've got elderberry, I've got Acer negundo, the box elder. This Modesto ash was my existing street tree. Corylus cornuta, the hazelnut. And if you like hazelnuts, get a couple because male and female trees need to be there for cross-pollination and seed setting. Prunus virginiana, a wonderful keystone shrub again. And then the redbud. This one is only about 6 inches tall and it's underneath a wire basket because I don't want the squirrels getting to it. Second, choose those native shrubs, and lots to choose from. These are from CalScape again, 71 species native to San Mateo County. Should probably take out the second county there. And so some evergreen shrubs that look great all year round. These are in my home garden, and I love these. It just gives that lush appearance to a native garden. If people say, oh, native, it probably looks dry and nasty. It's like, no, look how pretty this looks, this coffee berry here. I grew this from a seed, and so easy, so easy. A friend gave me a seed and it was free. And so become friends with native California plant people and they will give you their extras. That's an easy way to get started. Join the CNPS because they're always like having sales and people give plants away and share seeds. I do as well. I have lots of seeds. Vaccinium ovatum, which is our native huckleberry. The bonus here is that these have a little tiny blueberry on them and they are delicious. Mine are full of blueberries right now. Arctostaphylos ground cover, super easy to grow. And then Ribes viburnifolium, and all these are easy, super low water use. They really don't need any maintenance. They're pretty easy. So let's talk about some other ways to keep water in the environment. What plants specifically work pretty well for that? Succulents. Succulents. The word succulent comes from the Latin word succus, meaning juice or sap. So they're juicy. This is a great way for you to store water. You can store water in a rain barrel. That's great. But why not store it in living tissues? When people are out in the desert, people say, well, you probably should drink that water in that canteen because it's supposed to be helping you. And water in the environment should be inside plants and organisms to help it. One great place to put that water is in succulents. And there's so many different kinds to choose from here in California. We've got cactuses, we've got liliacea, agaves, sedums, crassula, leptocyanes, dudleas, and even bulbs. Bulbs like these guys here, they are living tissues that are full of carbohydrates. So they've got water in there. And they store goodies underground for us. So, just another way to increase that complexity, hide some goodies underground in bulbs. They do more than we realize. Bulbs are great. Things that have big taproots and big sort of root stalks on them are a great way to sequester carbon from the environment. So yet another way these native plants are helping out. And so many to choose from, really. It's like Christmas every day for years. 188 succulents native to California. One of my favorites, super easy to grow from seed, are the Dudleas. And they're, people say plant them at an angle to help them not rot. And you can see they literally grow talk about low maintenance on a cliffside, on a vertical surface. It's crazy. So they defy gravity. They're wonderful plants. They store moisture. Things eat these, and so can get at that moisture in the environment. Again, with the Dudleyias, these are ones in my own garden. So some of these, like this Dudleya virens here in the March versus September, some of them desiccate a little bit during the hot, dry period. They're not dead. They are storing moisture, but some more than others. I think this one still looks pretty good, even in October or September. And then we have a different kind, Dudleya bretonii. You can see in September, it's kind of crispy at the bottom, but then in March, when it rains, it fluffs out. Super easy plant. For a lush look, you can mix succulents that don't go dormant with a dark color evergreen. And this is a natural picture that I took to get some inspiration. Easy to recreate. This is a beautiful gray-green sedum growing here, a ground cover, next to a beautiful ground cover Arctostaphylos. Doesn't that look lush and beautiful? This is taken in the summertime. There's a cedar tree in the background with some roses growing as well. So just a beautiful combination there. So, I'm just going to say native gardens are less maintenance than a non-native garden with a lawn. There's no mowing, no extra watering. There's no, depending on what you choose, you don't have to fuss over like pesticides and fungicides, all those things that kill stuff. Basically, your main work will be just keeping the weeds down, the non-native plants that want to get in there and ruin your day. What I do is I pull a few at a time. Sometimes I go whole hog, but mostly I just take it little bits at a time. You irrigate plants to establish them. You want to encourage those roots to seek water. Just outside the root ball is good. Prune sparingly. You want to control dried up dead material for fire safety. Don't fertilize. You don't have to fertilize. If you need to amend your soil, if it's heavy clay, I use cactus mix. I mulch to control weeds initially and help establish plants. And then I let the leaves that drop off the trees take over. And to make it look neat and tidy, I'll put down bark mulch 1 chip thick so that it looks thicker than it is. I leave bare areas of dirt for bees to nest in the ground because 70% of our native bees will nest underground. And I don't use leaf blowers in planted areas. If you're using a leaf blower to clean off hardscape, then use an electrically powered blower because you're reducing fumes and emissions. They're not as noisy. But leave the leaves underneath plants. Even if they're on top of the plants, those leaves will break down. I mean, if you have like 6 inches of leaves smothering a plant, you can just brush them off to the side, but just leave them. I mean, you'll be surprised at the number of moths that will come flying out if you hand water something. And that's how you know that you're doing it right, when you see wings everywhere and things are buzzing. And of course, don't use pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Basically, you don't have to do much. Less is more in a native garden. Let nature show you what she wants to do. And of course, you want to avoid creating an ecological trap. I can't stress enough how attractive these plants are to organisms. You plant something, it's like, okay, it didn't get eaten this year. Maybe I don't have these species. They will find it eventually. And if it's not being eaten this year, it will be eaten. If things are getting eaten down to a nub, that means plant more, because obviously that thing in the salad bar that you're putting out is really good, and everybody wants a few more chafing dishes full of that particular plant. So things that are traps in the environment are a huge one is light pollution at night. And so you can lose up to 60% of insects around a window or a light source every night. And so these insects who don't spend a lot of time as adults, which they're only adults basically to mate and die, they're not able to complete their life cycle. So one of the things that you can do is put outside lights on motion sensors or use yellow light bulbs. In our windows, we have blackout blinds to keep the light pollution down. That one is huge, 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 huge. The other one is to leave the leaves. Leaves act as a sponge to help keep moisture in the environment, and they provide shelter for overwintering pupa. You know, a lot of insects will go through like what's called 5 instars, where they go through different molts. And then the 5th one, before they become a full-fledged adult, they hang out in that stage for months until the time is right, and then they emerge as an adult. And they do that in the leaf litter. Lots of salamanders like to hide out in the leaf litter. You know, so again, do less work, leave your leaves, and eliminate the use of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Those things get into the soil where the bees are nesting, and those things can actually interfere with the development of new baby bees. So, you know, just a few things to be mindful of so we can help these things, these creatures, these wonderful things that are storing moisture and keeping it moving through the environment, so that they can complete their life cycles. And then finally, I see Kieran raised a hand. I'm done, so let me finish this last final thoughts. So I talked about these broad concepts. You know, I mean, it's one thing to talk about a lawn, but really we're talking about living organisms. Plants are living organisms. So we need to talk about the ecosystem. We need to talk about the function of moisture in the environment and the sort of this broad framework in which to make decisions. And among, you know, when you're planting native gardens, among the other ecosystem services and saving money on water and maintenance, the more that you understand these interrelationships in nature, you learn how to optimize the productivity of your native plant garden, which will lead to an abundance of life, as well as the enhancement of your appreciation and your role in caring for nature's complex beauty. And with that, that is slide 47, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Wow, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I have a few questions. I will let Kieran. Kieran, would you like to speak? You're allowed to talk if you'd like. I am, maybe I'm, apologize. It says allowed to talk. It seems like it should be working, but I'm not hearing you.
Is his mic muted?
Let me see here. Is there a way you'd be able to type your question in the chat? I'm not sure why perhaps I'm doing something wrong. I apologize, but I'm not able to hear you.
Well, I'm happy to, you know, have any sorts of questions that people might have. I know it's a lot of concepts to sort of have that sort of broad framework of all this, but really it's, you know, it's all about biology, all about these living organisms, and moisture is such a huge part of life on this planet. And you know, to really be able to see where moisture is at its best use, and its best use is keeping things alive. And you know, being able to circulate the moisture through the environment, it's kind of like money in the bank. So instead of money sitting in the bank, if it's working through the economy, then, you know, it helps so many more people, right? Rather than if somebody's like hoarding, like, I've got all my money here, I'm gonna like not. But if it's being shared, um, and organisms being these social creatures, these plants are being social creatures, they are going to share. And I've, I get glimpses of these sort of relationships when I go and visit uh, parks and open spaces and things like that. And one of the more interesting things that I have seen is when I saw a male and a female willow tree. They were very, very old, right next to each other. And it was like Mr. and Mrs. or Grandpa and Grandma, because they need each other for creating a lot of seeds. And when I saw these two trees next to each other, I mean, they were old and stately and just like vibrant with blooms and pollen. It was crazy. And, I got chills, and I still get chills thinking about seeing them together and thinking, there's so many communities and relationships that we don't get to see directly, but getting glimpses like that give you a clue that there's these deeper, more ancient relationships that exist, and that, we can help facilitate those in our role as water stewards.
I love the way you described that. Thank you for just creating that visualization, because everything is so connected, even in our gardens. And we might not have realized it. I have a question. It's more about sort of maintenance. What if you have like moles kind of digging holes in your lawn? Like how, I mean, like, I guess
Yeah,
my reaction is wanting to get rid of them because they're just creating
right.
holes. But what do you think?
So, you know, they can be pesty, certainly. Um, and um, what they're after, sometimes they're after roots of plants, but a lot of times they're after grubs underground, tasty bits of protein under there. If you're planting things like bulbs and new plants, you can actually, in the planting hole itself, create a little wire basket so that they can't get in and ruin your day by doing that. Other people use gravel, sharp gravel in a planting hole, and that seems to slow them down pretty well because they're not able to tunnel in it very as effectively. So what I might try doing is dumping gravel down those holes, um, and putting up an owl box or a raptor perch. An owl box would probably be pretty helpful.
Can you just describe maybe briefly an L box? And then certainly anyone else who wants to ask a question, it's open to everyone. So I don't want to hog your time, but
Right.
what is an L box?
So an owl, OWL for the bird, the night bird, so that they can have a place to hang out and raise their young. And if you have a good protein source like these rodents that are in the ground, that's their prime source of food, right? And so, you can get, I think you can buy owl boxes from like the Audubon Society or something like this. But people do put those up to, create another link in that food chain. So nesting sites are super important, right? And if there aren't any available, then we have to provide them. So I think that when we see an imbalance in one species, it's because we don't have the right prey-predator relationship. And so we can, facilitate that by providing a nice condominium for an owl to live in, because there's a ready food source. And food, food is one thing, but you also have to have a nesting site. And that's where the, you know, the life cycle continues. The young are raised. It has to be a good safe spot for them, whether it's a bird or an insect.
Thank you. That makes sense. I really appreciate you describing that for us. So I don't see any questions in the chat right now. I'm happy to ask another question, but I want to just pause and see if any of the attendees would like to ask a question.
Well, I see that
Okay.
we have a few. They're just being shy.
Exactly. That's fine. Um, uh, my other question is, what about, I have a friend who grew some strawberries and she was so excited. They were just, this was last summer. And then I think she wasn't sure what kind of animal came, but it looked like they were eating them. So is that something that you would cover with wire, or how do you protect, strawberry plants?
Um, yeah, so strawberries are good. And lots of animals eat them, squirrels, skunks, just birds. And, I use wire baskets that I get from the Container Store, for example, or I make wire baskets out of hardware cloth. And you can get a fine mesh so that, nothing's getting through there. Some people use row covers with, they're like these spun polyester blanket thingies that go over. I don't like to use those because they disintegrate, and wire baskets are very reusable. So that's what I would do. That's my go-to with anything that I want to protect, is a physical barrier. And the wire baskets just come in so handy for other things. So they're like super useful. And so that might be a way to go.
Great, thank you. All right, well, I have one more question that I'll ask, and then again, please put your questions in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to speak up. But my other question is, you mentioned, just like, let's say if you don't have a very big budget, but you want to have a nice garden, or just grow some plants. And I heard you say seeds, which
Yes.
is it's a great idea. So is the time frame a lot longer for a seed, or can you give me an idea if you start putting some seeds out, like, how long would that take?
Seeds are a mystery to me sometimes. Some germinate pretty readily, and others, can take over a year to germinate. So, for example, I tried starting some trillium seeds, because trilliums from seed to blossom can be over 7 years. The seed itself that I have took over a year to germinate. Oh, I was like, it was a year and a half. And I was like, is this ever going to come out? Ever? Because I'm really into, like, and I also try things that are like bulbs, like the lily species that we have. Bulbs are expensive. Trilliums are expensive. A small container that's been growing in a nursery for 4 or 5 years is like $50. So it's a trade-off of time versus money. Do you want the instant gratification of something that's been growing for a few years, or do you want to try something from seed if you want to save money? Do you have the time? I always tell people growing things like lily bulbs from seed is a young person's enterprise, because they can take 7 years from seed to bloom, and it's like, okay, I need to do the math. How old are you? So that's a consideration. What I find is that things really, for me, because I'm always doing things, and seeds surprise me. It's like, oh, I sowed those seeds. I totally forgot that they were there, and they all come up, and so that's a really fun thing, is that you can kind of plant it and then kind of forget about it. And then later it's just like, oh, which is why labels are so important. But if you're looking for kind of like, you need some sort of instant greenery, then I would say go for the plant. And if you can get a plant that's grown from seed rather than a cutting, you're doing better, because then you're preserving genetic diversity. with cuttings, basically you're cloning a single plant and they're all exactly the same genetically. That can be, but that being said, that can be a great way to generate a lot of plants very quickly if you wanted to cover an area. But remember, the function of pollinators is to move around the genes and the environments. So what do we want to do? We can find a happy medium, I think, of things. I certainly myself grow things from cuttings because, I can't afford a lot of plants, and some things are super easy to grow. So I do a mixture of both things. So like if you're looking to like, you in your design, you have 12 ground cover Arctostaphylos, but you can only afford one plant. Go ahead and plant that one and then take cuttings and then grow those out. And within a couple of years, you'll have a dozen more plants. Usually my experience has been I can get a plant from a cutting to something that's plantable within about 6 months. So some are a little bit more reticent than others, but Arctostaphylos are super easy to propagate from cuttings. Things like the erigerons, the seaside daisy, super easy from cuttings. But some things are really easy from seed, and seeds are fun. Seeds are cheap. And I also do, on one of my YouTube videos, I talk about cold moist stratification of seeds, where I pre-sprout them before I plant them. And that's very interesting because I can see how long it takes things to germinate ahead of time. And once they sprout, then I plant them. And then I don't have to wait a year and a half with a pot of like soil that's like, it's not doing anything. And then all of a sudden something, it's like, is that a cotyledon? Oh my gosh, a seed is sprouted, so that's always a fun thing because, that's how seeds are, and it's like some seeds, they don't all sprout at once. Seeds hedge their bets. So some will germinate immediately. Others will germinate the next year. Some will germinate a few months later. They spread it out. And that's one of those adaptations to changing conditions that seeds do. So they don't put all their eggs in a basket and all germinate all at once, because bad things can happen to a huge population. If they're all doing the same thing, if a few stragglers are not within the herd, then they can live another day if something bad were to happen. So, but seeds, I have a lot of seeds. I just, at our open house that we did for the Peloton Municipal Services Center, we gave away packets of 10 different species of seeds that we grow in our gardens. So if you're looking for free seeds, become friends with a native plant person, because they will have a bunch of seeds, because plants produce abundance. I was harvesting seeds this morning, and I had my shopping bag, and I was just like striking the plants, and the seeds were just dropping in there. And I think I got like a pound of seeds this morning. So there's plenty of seed out there. The thing that when you're buying a plant in a nursery, you're paying for time. Did the person spend 2 or 3 years watering it and nurturing it to a $50 price tag? Probably. So it's some things are worth it. You have to have it. And I will actually buy plants of things that I can't find seeds for. And then once I have that plant, then I'll go to town on the seeds. So lots of ways.
That's great.
Yeah, lots of ways to get abundance. And in our gardens, we have hundreds of species now. And so it's like I have my own private nursery. It's not really my own private nursery, but it's all these plants where I can get seeds, I can get cuttings, and I have a lot of species. So, if you become friends, if you want free plants, become friends with a CNPS person, a native plant person, and they will give you things. It's like, look, I've got some extra seedlings.
That's awesome. That is so inspiring. I just love to hear that you have so many species. That is just great.
We do.
I mean,
at our Gwynda Street garden, we have white sage, Salvia apiana, which people are poaching in the wild. And, you know, it just blows my mind because that plant is so easy from seed. What I do is I take these spent seed spikes, pile them up, and then in the spring, I lift up the seed heads that where they were, and there's 4 dozen seedlings underneath. Last year, I gave away 4 dozen seedlings because it's like, I can't waste them, right? Yeah, so it's like, so I share them. And, you know, that's another thing about these plants is that they're so good for sharing. You know, it's just like, you can be really generous. I mean, I was like flinging packets of seeds at people at the open house on Saturdays, like, here's 10 spear, take it here, take it, please.
What a wonderful gift. I mean, that is
Yeah.
so great to share because yeah, I just, plants can bring such joy. And so how nice to share them and let other people grow them as well.
Yeah.
So,
Well, they bring
yeah,
me such joy
yeah.
when I see the different species. And in our neighborhood, I live really close to the Primrose Garden. It's just like literally half a block from my house. And my own garden and then the garden down the street, you know, it's like biodiversity cornucopia. And we have so many butterflies in our neighborhood and so many bird species that just they hang out in my yard. You know, it's like monarch butterflies flying around, swallowtails, painted ladies, fritillaries, which feed on passion flower, checker spot butterflies, little blue butterflies, the Ackman blue, the skippers. I mean, it's wings everywhere. It's so great.
That is so great. I just, yeah, love to hear that. Well, I think we are just, yeah, we're really pretty much at time now. So I just really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much. I hope our audience did as well, or attendees. And, if anyone has any further questions, please feel free to reach out to me. We will be posting this recording on the Bosca classes, so we can search for it as well. So thank you again, Juanita, for being our instructor tonight. And I hope everyone has a very nice evening.
Thanks, Andrea.
Yes, thank you. Good night.